3 long years of searching, of empty nights and silent mornings. A father haunted by the memory of his lost daughters, believing they were gone forever, until the day fate led him to a dusty Wild West town, where a familiar voice carried across the wind, singing a melody he never thought he would hear again. What he discovered on that old wooden stage didn't just break his heart, it shattered the very world he had known. Watch closely as the story unfolds, and don't forget to share in the comments where you're watching from. If you feel the weight of these tales, subscribe to our channel and stay with us for the journey ahead. Now, settle in and experience the story as it comes alive. The sun had a way of burning straight through a person out here, as if it could strip away whatever dignity you still had left. By the time they stood me on that splintered platform in the middle of Main Street, the air shimmered above the dirt like heat off a blacksmith's forge. I could taste the grit on my teeth, feel it in the cracks of my lips. Someone had thrown a worn blanket over my shoulders that morning, more for the sake of modesty than kindness. It smelled of horse sweat and old hay. My ankles were raw from the rope they'd used the night before. I kept my head down so I wouldn't have to meet the stairs. It wasn't an auction for land or cattle. I was the thing being priced. 30 days' labor, they called it, a lawful contract, to pay off what they said I owed. Vagrancy fines, station damages, medical fees I never asked for. I'd heard the charges read once already, but they sounded worse the second time in the sheriff's oily voice. Every word was like another nail in a coffin I hadn't built. There was a slow murmur through the crowd, the kind that says folks aren't here for mercy, just spectacle. Boots scuffed the dirt below me, the crowd shifting in the shade of their hats. I could feel them appraising me without looking up, rough-faced men who'd spent their lives under sun and wind, hands like cracked leather, eyes dulled by dust and cheap whiskey. A few women stood back near the boardwalk, arms folded, lips pressed thin, as if they'd seen this too many times to care anymore. I wondered if any of them had been up here once, with the whole town measuring their worth in silver coins. The sheriff called out numbers like he was selling a mule. Keeps books, he said, reads, writes, city-trained. As if that were an advantage in a place where the only books were ledgers or Bibles. Someone near the front spat and muttered that books don't shovel, and the crowd chuckled. A man with a vest buttoned too neat grinned at me like a fox, offering a few dollars for house service. The sheriff didn't blink. He just kept coaxing, looking for a price high enough to make him smile. I kept my eyes on my hands, fingers clenched in the rough weave of the blanket. The longer I stood there, the smaller I felt. The platform swayed a little under my weight, each creak of the wood sharp in my ears. The heat pressed down harder, and I thought of water. Cool, clear water, but I knew better than to ask. Out here, thirst was just another way to remind you what you didn't have. Then the crowd shifted, and I heard hooves on the hard-packed street. Slow, deliberate. A horse stopped near the edge of the square, and the murmur went quiet in a way that felt unnatural. I looked up without meaning to. A man had dismounted and tied his reins to the hitching post. Dust streaked his trousers up to the knee, and his hat shaded his face, but I could tell his eyes were fixed on me. Not in the way the others looked. There was no hunger in it, no calculation, just a steady, unreadable watchfulness. He stepped through the ring of bodies like he had all the time in the world. I thought maybe he'd make a bid like the others. Instead, he shrugged off his coat, a coarse, heavy thing that smelled faintly of wood smoke even from where I stood, and held it open toward me. I didn't move at first. The sheriff's voice cut through the silence, asking if he was bidding. But the man didn't answer. He just told me to stand. I rose slowly, feeling every eye on me, and let him drape the coat over my shoulders. It settled around me like a shield, hiding the scrape on my ankle, hiding the rope's marks. The square seemed to draw in a breath it didn't let out. My heart was hammering hard enough I thought they might hear it. He said my name like he already knew it, though I'd never seen him before. Told the sheriff he'd pay the fees, all of them, and that I'd have a choice when I left his place. Stay on for wages or walk away free, coat and all. No one in that crowd had offered me a choice before. The sheriff didn't like it. I could see that in the way his smile cooled, but the man was steady, counting out silver coins without looking away from me. He didn't touch my arm when he helped me down from the platform. Just walked beside me through the dust until the square was behind us and the noise of the town faded. I didn't know his name yet. I didn't know the boy waiting for me on his farm, or that this was the first step toward the kind of life I'd almost stopped believing existed. All I knew was that for the first time in weeks, the rope around my ankle was gone, and someone had put a coat on my back without asking anything in return. The town fell behind us like a bad dream you're afraid to turn and look at in case it follows. The sound of it, the clink of glasses in the saloon, the drawl of voices on the boardwalk, the far-off hammering from the smithy, faded under the steady rhythm of hooves on dirt. The coat still hung heavy across my shoulders, the inside warm from his body heat, and I kept my hands tucked inside the folds like I was afraid someone might still try to take it back. We didn't speak for a while. Dust rose in soft clouds with each step of the horse, catching the late sun in gold streaks that made the air look almost kind. He led the animal on foot, one hand light on the reins, the other resting loose at his side. Every now and then, the wind pushed back the brim of his hat just enough to catch a glimpse of his face, lines carved deep around the eyes, not from age but from the kind of living that keeps you outside in all weather. When he finally spoke, it wasn't to ask where I'd come from or what I'd done to end up on that platform. "Road's long," he said simply, voice low and even, "but it's better than the square." I didn't answer. My throat still felt like it had been sandpapered by dust and humiliation. Instead, I watched the land shift as we left the last of the town's wooden buildings behind. The ground rolled in soft, dry hills scattered with sage and brittle grass, the smell sharp and clean after the sour staleness of Main Street. Far off, the mountains rose blue against the sky, their peaks holding onto the last snow like old secrets. After an hour, he lifted me onto the horse without asking. His hands were steady but careful, as if he knew how easily a person could flinch after too many wrong touches. I sat side saddle, the coat wrapping around my legs, the sway of the horse almost enough to lull me if I let it. We passed a weathered sign leaning crooked in the dirt, 3 Forks 12 miles. I didn't know the name. I didn't know any place out here, really. But the way he angled us off the main trail onto a narrower track told me we weren't heading for any settlement. The grass grew higher here, brushing against the stirrups, and the air smelled faintly of water I couldn't yet see. By the time we reached the ridge, the sun was low and the light had turned the whole world copper. From the crest, I saw it, a stretch of land cradled between 2 low hills, a creek cutting through the center like a silver ribbon. Cottonwoods leaned over the banks, their leaves whispering in the wind. A small farmhouse sat back from the water, built of pale, sun-bleached boards with a porch running along the front. Beside it, a barn sagged slightly at the roof, as though tired from years of holding up its own weight. A few chickens scratched near the fence, and I thought I saw the shadow of someone moving inside. "That's home," he said, and for a moment I couldn't tell if he meant it for himself, or if he was offering the word to me. As we drew closer, the creek's murmur reached my ears, carrying with it the faint metallic scent of wet stone. I hadn't realized how thirsty I still was until then. When we crossed the narrow wooden bridge, the boards rattled under the horse's hooves, and I felt a strange flutter in my chest. The kind that comes when you step somewhere no one from your past will find you. Or at least you hope they won't. A boy emerged from the barn as we rode in. He couldn't have been more than 10, hair sun-faded to a dusty blonde, face smudged with the kind of dirt that comes from work, not neglect. He stopped when he saw me, squinting like he was trying to place a shape in the distance. Then he looked at the man, his father, I guessed, and whatever question was in his eyes went unspoken. "This is Mara," the man said, using the name I'd given the sheriff. He didn't add anything else. Not who I was to him, not why I was here. Just my name, like it was enough. The boy nodded once, then turned back toward the barn without a word. Inside the farmhouse, the air was cooler, smelling faintly of flour and smoke. The floors creaked under my boots, and the walls were hung with simple things, a framed sketch of a horse, a cross made from 2 bent nails, a shelf lined with jars of dried herbs. On the table sat a half-empty plate of biscuits gone cold. "You can use the room upstairs," he said. "Second door on the left." There's water on the stand. I climbed the narrow staircase, the wood worn smooth under my hand on the rail. The room was small, the bed neatly made with a faded quilt, the window open just enough to let in the sound of the creek. I stood there for a long moment, letting the quiet wrap around me until it felt almost strange. But even in that quiet, I caught it, a tension beneath the stillness, like the way air feels before a storm. Maybe it was just me, carrying the unease of the town still in my skin. Or maybe it was the way he'd never told me his name, not even once on the ride here. When I finally lay down, the quilt pulled to my chin, I listened to the sounds of the house. The low murmur of a man's voice downstairs, the clink of metal, the distant laughter of the boy outside. And somewhere beyond all of it, the wind pressed against the walls as if testing them. I told myself I'd stay just long enough to get my strength back. But the truth was, I didn't know where else I could go. Morning came with the creak of the porch boards and the sound of boots pacing outside my window. I woke with the quilt bunched around me, the light spilling across the floor in a pale stripe. For a moment, I didn't remember where I was, the walls too clean, the air too still. Then the smell of baking bread drifted up from downstairs, and the pieces fell back into place. I found him already outside, standing by the barn with a bucket in one hand and a pitchfork in the other. He didn't look surprised to see me, only tipped his hat slightly and handed me an empty pail. "Water's in the creek," he said. "Best get it before the sun's high." The path to the water was narrow, worn into the grass by years of use. I knelt at the bank, the cold biting through my fingers as I dipped the bucket in. The current caught the metal rim, pulling against me like it wanted to keep it. On the far bank, a heron stood still as a shadow, watching me with eyes too sharp to belong to something so quiet. By the time I got back, the boy was in the yard, scattering feed for the chickens. He didn't speak, just glanced at me once before focusing back on the ground. His movements were quick, efficient, the kind you learn when work isn't optional. I wondered if he'd been told anything about me, or if I was just another piece of the landscape he didn't have the time to question. The days settled into a rhythm. I cleaned, I fetched water, I learned where he kept the feed and how much to give the horse without making her too restless. In the afternoons, I helped the boy pull weeds from the small vegetable patch near the porch. He never said much, but I could feel his eyes on me when he thought I wasn't looking, like he was trying to decide whether I was trouble or something worth keeping around. The man, my rescuer, though I wasn't sure I liked the word, worked with a quiet efficiency. He mended fences, split wood, checked the pasture where a single cow grazed like she had nowhere else to be. He spoke when he had to, not more, and I found myself grateful for it. Words had been too sharp lately, silence was softer. At night, the wind moved through the cottonwoods, their leaves whispering just outside my window. Sometimes I thought I heard something else beneath it, the creak of leather, the faint jingle of metal. But each time I looked, there was only the empty yard under a spill of stars. It was on the fifth night that I saw the first sign. I'd gone to the creek just after sunset, the air cooling fast, the light already turning silver. I knelt to fill the bucket and froze. In the mud along the bank, clear as if pressed moments ago, was a boot print. Too large for mine, too deep for the boys, and facing the direction of the house. I didn't tell him. I don't know why. Maybe because I wasn't sure what I'd seen, or maybe because saying it out loud would make it real. Instead, I carried the water back, the weight of it biting into my palms, my heart thudding louder than the creek behind me. The next day, I caught him watching the horizon. Not scanning it, not searching for something, but watching, the way you watch when you already know something's coming and you're trying to decide how long before it gets here. Work went on as usual, but I noticed the changes. He kept the rifle leaning near the porch now. The boy no longer wandered far from the barn. At night, the front door stayed bolted. And yet, he never asked me about my past, never pressed for details about the men in town or what they'd planned to do with me. Sometimes I wanted him to. Sometimes I wanted to spill it all, to pour the whole story out into the dirt and let it vanish. But every time I opened my mouth, the words felt heavy, like they'd sink before they ever reached his ears. One afternoon, as I was hanging laundry on the line, The wind shifted and carried with it the faintest smell, horses, sweat, and wood smoke. Not from the barn. Not from anywhere close. I turned slowly, my hands still tangled in the damp shirt I was pinning. Far off, beyond the ridge, a thin column of smoke curled into the sky. It could have been anything. A rancher burning brush. A campfire for travelers. But I kept staring at it until the wind pulled the smoke apart and the horizon swallowed it. That night, the creak was louder. Or maybe it was the sound of my own unease rushing through me. I stood at the open window, looking out over the dark yard, the shapes of the barn and the cottonwoods sharp against the starlight. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote yipped, joined by another, then another, until the night was full of their voices. The boy stirred in the room down the hall. I heard his footsteps on the floorboards, then the slow creak of the stairs. A moment later, a shadow moved past the yard, tall, steady, hat brim low. He didn't look back at the house. Just kept walking toward the edge of the pasture, rifle in hand. I watched until he disappeared into the dark. Sleep didn't come easy after that. I kept thinking of the boot print, the smoke, the way his eyes had fixed on the horizon like he was measuring the distance between us and something he couldn't quite see yet. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself we were far enough from town that no one would bother coming this way. But deep down, I knew better. You can put miles between yourself and the past, but the past doesn't measure distance the same way you do. Sometimes it's only a day behind. Sometimes it's closer. The wind came up strong that morning, bending the tops of the cottonwoods and rattling the shingles on the porch roof. I was up before the boy, standing at the window with my hands wrapped around a tin mug of coffee, watching the grass in the pasture lean under the gusts. The creek was swollen from the night's rain, carrying twigs and leaves in its current. I almost convinced myself it was going to be an ordinary day, the kind where the only trouble was a loose fence rail or a stubborn mule, when the sound came. It started low, too faint to be certain of at first. A rhythmic thump that didn't belong to wind or creek or the old boards of the house. I held my breath and it grew clearer, closer, the distant drum of hooves. By the time I stepped onto the porch, he was already there, rifle in hand, eyes fixed on the rise where the dirt road curved out of sight. The boy appeared in the doorway behind me, his face pale in the morning light. "They're coming," he said, like it was a fact he'd been expecting. Over the ridge they appeared, 3 riders, their silhouettes sharp against the sky. They weren't moving fast, but they weren't wandering, either. Their horses moved in that steady, purposeful gait that eats up miles without tiring. He didn't speak to me, only nodded toward the barn. I understood without asking. Get the boy inside, keep low, stay quiet. From the loft window of the barn, I watched them draw closer. Dust trailed behind them in a thin, rising cloud. The lead rider wore a black hat pulled low, his coat flaring slightly with each stride of his horse. The other 2 flanked him like shadows. I couldn't see their faces, but I didn't need to. I knew that kind of posture, the way men sat when they'd come to take something, not trade for it. They slowed as they neared the yard. The man stepped down from the porch and stood in the open, the rifle resting casual in his hands but angled just enough to make a point. The lead rider pulled up, his horse tossing its head and blowing steam into the cold air. "Mornin'," he said. His voice carried too easily on the wind, like it had been made to cut through noise. "Mornin'," the man answered. The rider's gaze swept over the house, the barn, and finally the pasture before coming back to him. "Got word there's been trouble in town," he said. "Figured we'd check in on our neighbors." The man didn't move, didn't even blink. "We're fine here." The rider's eyes narrowed, like he'd been hoping for a different answer. "That so? You haven't seen any strangers come through? Someone might be hidin' out." The man's voice stayed level. "Only folks here are the ones that belong." For a moment, the only sound was the creak of saddle leather and the soft shifting of the horse's weight. Then the rider smiled, slow, deliberate, the kind of smile that says he's picturing how things will go if he decides to stop being polite. "Well," he said, "if you do see anyone, you let us know. Wouldn't want to think you're keepin' secrets. He touched his reins and turned his horse. The other two followed, but not before one of them let his gaze drift toward the barn loft, toward me. His eyes caught mine for the briefest second, and there was no mistaking it. He'd seen me. They rode off at the same unhurried pace, disappearing back over the rise. But the dust they left behind hung in the air long after they were gone. When I came out of the barn, the man was still standing in the yard, staring at the spot where the riders had vanished. "Pack your things," he said without looking at me. I hesitated. "Where are we?" "Just do it." His voice wasn't raised, but there was something in it that made the question die in my throat. Inside, my hands shook as I shoved what little I had into a canvas sack. The boy moved quickly, gathering blankets, food, a lantern. Outside, I heard the man moving along the porch, the click of the rifle's lever, the solid sound of cartridges sliding into place. By midday, the horses were saddled. He tied the supplies behind the saddle and helped the boy mount. When I put my foot in the stirrup, he caught my arm. "They'll be back," he said. "And next time, they won't ask first." We rode hard for the better part of the afternoon, cutting across open land, keeping to the low ground when we could. The wind carried the smell of rain, but the sky stayed clear, the sun sharp enough to burn. When we finally stopped, it was in a shallow draw hidden by scrub. He unsaddled the horses and set them to graze while the boy gathered kindling. I sat on the ground, my back against a rock, trying to catch my breath. "They knew," I said finally. He didn't ask what I meant. "Yeah. Was it me they were looking for?" He glanced at me, then away. "Doesn't matter. They'll come after anything they think is worth talking." That night, I lay under the stars, listening to the horses shift and snort softly in the dark. Every sound carried farther in the open. The crack of branches, the distant bark of a coyote, the faint whistle of the wind through the grass. I kept thinking about the rider's smile, about the way the other one's eyes had found mine through the barn loft window. Sleep never came. Not really. By dawn, we were moving again. The dawn was cold, slicing through the thin layer of fog that had settled over the hills overnight. I woke to the man already mounted, the boy fumbling with the reins as if the simple act of holding them tight might keep the world at bay. There was no warmth in the air, no comfort in the morning sun as it peeked over the ridge. Only the steady, unrelenting pull of miles to ride and the knowledge that we were being hunted. The horses' hooves sank slightly in the dew-soaked earth, and the rhythmic sound of them striking the ground became a heartbeat I couldn't escape. Every shadow seemed to flicker with movement, every bird that took flight made me flinch. The man rode ahead, his eyes scanning the horizon, hands loose but ready on the reins, the rifle across his back like a natural extension of himself. I didn't speak. There was nothing to say. Even the boy seemed to understand that words would be wasted here, in the open country where silence was both shield and curse. Hours passed, the land stretching endlessly around us. Rolling hills gave way to rocky outcrops, and then to scrubland so dry it seemed to crack under the sun's growing heat. We stopped briefly at a creek, not to rest, but to allow the horses a quick drink. I knelt, cupping water in my hands, trying not to meet the man's eyes when he stepped close behind me. There was an unspoken question in his gaze. "Do you understand why we can't stop?" And I nodded without looking. It was late morning when we saw them, 3 riders on the horizon, dust rising behind them like a warning. They hadn't expected us to move so far so fast, or maybe they had. Either way, the sight of them made the blood in my veins turn cold. The man didn't hesitate. He shifted his weight, whispering something to the boy that I didn't catch, and then we spurred the horses forward. Not away from them, but through them. We cut across a low ridge, letting the uneven terrain break the line of sight, each leap and jolt testing the boy's courage and my own resolve. I was unprepared for the rhythm of fear. It pulsed through me in waves, matching the motion of the horse beneath me. My knuckles were white on the reins, my stomach twisting as we plunged down narrow gullies and leapt over fallen logs. The man moved like water, his horse barely making a sound as he anticipated every dip and rise, every loose stone. One of the riders broke from the line, trying to flank us. He came closer than I thought possible, and I caught the briefest glimpse of his face. Pale, scarred, eyes sharp with intent. I heard the man murmur a low curse, then the crack of a rifle firing. A sharp, singular report, and the rider swerved, forcing his horse wide before regaining balance. We didn't stop. The terrain grew rougher, the brush scratching at our arms and legs, pulling at our clothes, as if trying to slow us down. The boy's voice trembled as he called out when a branch caught the edge of his sleeve. The man answered him in low, firm tones, giving instructions in precise, measured words. Hold steady, lean left, follow the bend, keep your horse's stride. By midday, exhaustion was crawling along my spine. Every muscle in my body screamed for respite, but the fear of stopping kept me moving. The sun was high, turning the landscape into a glittering hazard. Heat waves danced over the rocks, and sweat ran down my back under the rough fabric of my shirt. We came to a canyon rim, the path narrowing to barely enough room for 2 horses side by side. Below, the river cut a jagged line through the valley, the only way down a treacherous descent of loose shale. The riders were close now, the dust of their approach unmistakable. The man paused, studying the slope. "We go down," he said, voice steady. "Careful. Don't look down too long." I nodded, stomach knotting. One misstep and we'd all tumble into the river below, our horses sliding, hooves skidding on loose rock. The boy's white-knuckled grip was a silent echo of my own terror. We started down, the man leading, moving with absolute precision. He whispered to the boy, correcting his balance, instructing the horse in subtle shifts of weight and nudges of the reins. I tried to imitate him, but the descent felt endless, the river below growing closer with every trembling step. Halfway down, the first shot rang out, the echo bouncing off the canyon walls like a drum. It hit near the man's horse, kicking up a cloud of dust and rocks. The boy screamed, and I held my horse tighter, heart hammering. The man glanced back, rifle raised, firing once more with deadly accuracy. The flanking rider reeled, slowing, forcing the others to hesitate. By the time we reached the riverbank, we were breathing hard, hearts pounding like war drums. The horses pawed at the sand, stamping their feet to regain balance. The man dismounted, scanning the ridges above us. "They're stubborn," he said quietly. "But they'll follow only so far. Rivers are natural barriers, for now." We led the horses to the water, letting them drink, while the man set about making a small signal fire, smoke curling into the sky to mask our scent from any prying eyes above. The boy collapsed against a boulder, shivering, eyes wide and uncomprehending. I stayed close to the man, watching him move with a calmness that belied the danger. Every so often, he'd pause, glance at the horizon, and adjust the horses, his hands precise, movements fluid. There was something about him that made me feel both safe and utterly exposed, like he was a shield and a blade at once. Night fell, and the canyon swallowed us in shadows. We huddled near the fire, the horses grazing nearby, ears flicking at every sound. The man sat with his rifle across his knees, eyes scanning the darkness. I felt the weight of our situation pressing down, knowing the riders would not rest, would not leave until we were cornered or broken. I realized then that the journey ahead was longer and darker than I had imagined. Every mile, every decision, would matter. And the man, the one who had taken us in, who had risked himself for our survival, held secrets that I was beginning to understand were the only things standing between us and certain death. Sleep came in fits, shallow and uneasy, haunted by the echo of hooves on the ridge and the sharp, deliberate smile of the rider I'd glimpsed through the barn loft. By dawn, we would ride again, and the long pursuit would begin anew, each mile stretching the limits of endurance, courage, and trust. The morning air was bitter, carrying the smell of wet earth and the sharp tang of metal from the rifle the man had kept slung over his shoulder overnight. The canyon was quiet, almost too quiet. Even the horses seemed to sense it, standing tense with ears swiveling, hooves tapping in nervous rhythms. I could feel my pulse rising with each small sound, the crack of a branch, the distant caw of a raven, the rustle of wind over loose stones. The man scanned the ridges above us with unwavering focus, eyes narrowing. "They'll be waiting," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of certainty. "You'll see why I moved us to the river. They don't know these banks, and that gives us an advantage, if we play it right." The boy shivered but nodded, hands gripping the reins as if holding on tight could somehow shield him from the coming storm. I followed the man's lead, watching every subtle gesture. The tilt of his head, the shift of his weight, the almost imperceptible pause before taking a step. We moved slowly at first, testing the terrain. The canyon walls rose sharply, jagged and unyielding, casting long shadows that shifted as the sun climbed. Every bend of the river revealed new obstacles, fallen trees, jagged rocks, patches of sand that gave way beneath the horses' hooves. And every obstacle was a potential trap. Then it happened. From a ridge above, a sharp crack rang out. A rifle shot. Dust erupted from the cliffside near the man's horse, and the boy screamed, flinching against me. The horses bolted instinctively, hooves thrashing, and I struggled to hold mine steady. "Down!" the man barked, and we hit the riverbank, throwing ourselves behind large boulders as another volley of shots came raining down. The bullets bit the air, pinging off stone and dirt, kicking up sprays of sand. My heart hammered in my chest. The sound of the river was drowned out by the ringing in my ears, the panic clawing at my throat. The man didn't hesitate. He moved fluidly, checking our surroundings, calculating distances with the precision of a predator. "Keep low," he said to the boy. "Stay behind me. Move only when I move." I watched in awe as he returned fire, rifle lifting with measured precision. Each shot was a calculated risk, a statement of intent. The attackers faltered, their formation disrupted by his accuracy. One rider tumbled from his horse, clutching his shoulder, and another hesitated at the ridge, peering down at the chaos. The boy whimpered, and I put a hand on his shoulder. "We'll be fine," I murmured, though my own voice betrayed the tension coiling inside me. The man barked a command, and we began a slow, deliberate retreat along the riverbank, using boulders and the natural curves of the terrain to mask our movements. It was a delicate dance. Too fast and the horses might slip, too slow and we'd be pinned. Every step was a calculated gamble. We reached a narrow alcove where the river carved a small cove. The water was dark and cold, and the horses hesitated at the edge. The man crouched low, scanning the ridge above. "We use the water as cover. Stay close. Move only on my signal." I swallowed hard and followed his lead, stepping carefully into the river. The current tugged at my legs, icy and relentless, but the depth was shallow enough for the horses to follow. The boy stumbled, nearly falling, but the man was there instantly, steadying him with a firm grip. "Focus," he whispered, voice calm yet unyielding. "The river is our shield. Let it hide us, not trap us." Above us, the riders tried to line up shots, but the angle made it difficult. Water sprayed from each bullet that hit the river, and the sound of the current masked much of the gunfire. The man's strategy was working, at least for now. Hours passed as we moved cautiously downstream, each step testing our endurance and nerve. The boy's arms ached from holding the reins, his legs stiff from the river's chill. My own muscles screamed, but I dared not show weakness. The man was an unyielding force, guiding us with subtle gestures and quiet commands. By midday, we found temporary refuge behind a large rock formation jutting into the river. The horses grazed cautiously, ears flicking, while the man scanned the surrounding ridges. "They'll regroup," he said. "And when they do, it won't be the same." I realized then that this chase wasn't just about survival. It was a test of skill, of endurance, of intelligence. The man's knowledge of terrain, tactics, and timing was far beyond anything I had imagined. Every movement, every pause, every careful breath was part of a larger strategy, one I was only beginning to comprehend. The boy shivered again, and I handed him my jacket. "We'll make it," I said softly, though the weight of uncertainty pressed down. "We have to." The man knelt near the edge of the rock formation, drawing lines in the dirt with a stick, plotting possible moves, escape routes, and ambush points. I watched, fascinated by the meticulous care he took with each mark. It was like watching a chess master think 3 moves ahead, each decision carrying life or death consequences. "Listen," he said finally, straightening up. "They'll strike at dusk. That's when the shadows favor them, and the river narrows. But I've prepared for it. You'll see, not every battle is fought with brute force. Some are won with patience, misdirection, and timing." The river flowed steadily, oblivious to the tension that gripped the three of us. I felt the weight of the coming confrontation settle like a stone in my chest. The man's calm was a thin veneer over a well of determination, a determination that I knew would be tested before nightfall. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the canyon, we prepared for the ambush, setting traps, moving quietly, and positioning the horses. The man's eyes were sharp, calculating angles, distances, and probabilities. Every instinct, every lesson from his past, was in play. And I knew, deep down, that the night ahead would define us, whether we survived or became just another echo in the canyon. The sun hovered just above the horizon, casting a blood-orange glow across the jagged canyon walls. Shadows stretched and merged, folding the riverbanks into a labyrinth of darkness and light. The man crouched low behind a boulder, eyes scanning every ridge, every fold in the terrain. The boy's hands shook as he gripped the reins, trying to mimic the man's stillness. I swallowed hard, trying to calm my own nerves, my breath coming in short, tense gasps. A whisper of movement drifted from upstream, barely perceptible over the rush of the river. The man's hand shot out, signaling us to freeze. In that instant, I understood. Every instinct, every muscle in our bodies, had to be tuned like a weapon. Any twitch could give us away. The first rider appeared atop a ridge, silhouetted against the fading sun. He was alone, scouting. A signal flickered from his hand, and within moments, shadows on the horizon multiplied. Dozens of figures emerged from the canyon, mounted, rifles glinting in the dying light. The ambush was complete. "Hold," the man whispered. "Let them come closer. Let them think the river will swallow us." The first volley came swiftly. Bullets ripped through the air, thudding against rocks and splashing into the river. Horses reared, screams pierced the canyon, and the boy instinctively ducked behind the man. My own heart pounded as I tried to steady the trembling of my hands. The man moved like a phantom, rolling to the side, returning fire with precise, controlled shots. Each bullet found its mark, forcing riders to duck, hesitate, or fall. "Aim for disruption, not elimination," he commanded. "Make them second-guess themselves." The attackers pressed, believing their numerical advantage would crush us. But the river's currents worked in our favor. Horses were forced to slow, rifles wobbled, and the narrow banks left little room for maneuver. The man guided us along the twists and bends, using every natural barrier to channel the enemy into predictable paths. A rider broke from the main group, charging directly toward us. He raised his rifle, but the man's voice cut through the chaos. "Now." The boy, despite his fear, moved instinctively, pulling a rope the man had set. A fallen log toppled across the path, crushing the horse beneath it and sending the rider tumbling into the dust. Another shot rang out, and one of the attackers fell, screaming. Panic rippled through their ranks. I realized then that this was not just a battle of weapons, it was a battle of minds. The man anticipated every move, every mistake, turning the canyon into a trap that favored the few over the many. The riverbanks narrowed, forcing the attackers into a bottleneck. The man used this to his advantage, shifting positions with uncanny speed. His rifle moved in deadly arcs, a dance of precision and patience. One by one, the riders faltered, unable to navigate the treacherous terrain while under fire. The boy cried out when a stray bullet splashed near the water, drenching him. "Stay down!" the man shouted, and I dove, pulling him low. The tension in the air was suffocating, but there was a rhythm, the rhythm of survival, of calculation, of endurance. Hours seemed to pass in minutes. Darkness crept in, swallowing the edges of the canyon, but the man's focus never wavered. His eyes adjusted to the dim light, tracking the silhouettes of the remaining attackers, predicting their every maneuver. We moved, ducked, fired, and retreated in a fluid motion, a carefully choreographed counterattack that left the enemy frustrated and disoriented. Finally, the last of the riders hesitated, their formation broken, morale shattered. The man seized the moment, a final, decisive push. He signaled us to advance, rifles raised, and we charged the remaining attackers. Horses collided, riders fell, and the canyon echoed with the chaos of desperation and fear. By the time silence fell, only the echoes of screams and the splash of the river remained. The canyon, now dark and eerily still, bore the scars of the battle. The man leaned against a boulder, breathing heavily, eyes scanning the horizon for any lingering threats. The boy looked up at him, wide-eyed and trembling. We did it," he whispered. "Yes," the man replied, voice steady but carrying the weight of exhaustion. "For now. But this was only the beginning. Remember this, survival isn't just about strength. It's about patience, observation, and knowing when to act. And trust me, there are more challenges ahead." I looked around at the aftermath, the fallen, the spent gunfire, the river slowly reclaiming the space we'd fought so hard to protect. I realized then that we were no longer merely escaping. We were learning, adapting, and surviving. And as much as fear had driven us, determination now bound us together in ways words couldn't describe. Night settled fully over the canyon. The stars appeared, distant and cold, indifferent to our struggle. Yet beneath that indifferent sky, a quiet resolve took root in all three of us. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, but tonight, we survived. The man finally allowed himself a moment of rest, sitting by the river's edge, rifle across his knees, eyes never leaving the darkness. The boy leaned against me, shivering but alive, and I understood, whatever lay ahead, we would face it together. Because survival, as we had just learned, was never guaranteed. It was earned, one choice, one breath, one calculated move at a time. The river flowed quietly now, indifferent to the chaos it had witnessed hours earlier. The canyon, scarred by the battle, was bathed in the cold silver light of a rising moon. The man sat by the riverbank, rifle resting across his knees, eyes scanning the shadows as if they might conceal another ambush. The boy sat huddled beside me, shivering not from cold but from adrenaline, his wide eyes reflecting the faint shimmer of starlight. "We need to move," the man finally said, his voice low, deliberate. "They'll regroup. They always do." I nodded, still trying to steady my shaking hands. Do you always fight like that?" I asked, unable to stop the words from tumbling out. The man's gaze shifted toward me, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his features. "No," he said after a pause. "Not always. But I've survived enough battles to know the rules. And sometimes, the rules demand patience, precision, and ruthlessness." The boy swallowed hard. You make it sound like you've done this before." "A lot." The man's eyes darkened. "I have. And it's not a story I share lightly. Every choice I've made, every fight I've survived, it's brought me here. And now, you two are part of it." I felt a chill run through me. Part of what had drawn us to him, the sense of control, of strength, was the shadow that lingered behind every word, the unspoken history we weren't yet ready to hear. "Tell us," the boy whispered, voice almost trembling. "We need to know." The man sighed, a long, heavy exhale that seemed to carry the weight of years. "It's not a tale for the faint of heart. I've walked through deserts and cities alike, surviving when others didn't. Betrayal, greed, vengeance. I've seen it all. And I've made enemies that would see me dead just to settle scores decades old." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. This was bigger than we had imagined. Bigger than the ambush, bigger than the canyon, bigger than our own fears. "Are they after us?" I asked cautiously. The man's eyes narrowed. "No, not yet. But they will be. And when they come, you'll understand why the canyon was only the beginning." We moved silently through the shadows, following a narrow path that hugged the riverbank. The moonlight reflected off the water in rippling patterns, like a living map guiding our way. The man stopped occasionally, scanning the horizon, listening. Each sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, was amplified, interpreted, catalogued. "Why help us?" the boy asked, breaking the tense silence. The man looked at him, eyes piercing. "Because I've seen what fear can do to good people. I've seen it destroy them, bend them, turn them into monsters. You're not ready to survive this world alone, and if I don't teach you, someone else will destroy you." A sense of unease settled over me. His words weren't comforting, they were warnings. Truths I wasn't fully prepared to accept. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the occasional splash of water or distant howl. Finally, the man stopped, gesturing toward a cluster of rocks partially hidden by shadow. "Here. We rest. But lightly. Stay alert. There's more coming." As we settled behind the rocks, the man finally allowed himself a moment to sit fully, leaning back, eyes closing briefly. The boy shifted closer to me, exhausted but wide-eyed, and I realized the gravity of our situation. We were no longer mere travelers or victims of circumstance. We were part of something much larger, a game whose rules we barely understood. And then the man spoke again, softly, almost to himself. "They think they've seen everything I can do, but they don't know the half of it. Not even close. And soon, the real challenge will arrive. It's not the ambushes, or the bullets, or the narrow paths. It's what comes after. It's the shadow that follows every choice, every move. And it will find us, no matter where we hide." The boy shivered, clutching my arm. I shivered too, not from the cold, but from the understanding that we were standing on the edge of something far greater than fear or survival. The man's past, his enemies, and whatever darkness lay ahead were now entwined with ours. There was no turning back. In the distance, a howl echoed through the canyon. It wasn't just an animal, it was a herald, a warning, a sign that the night was far from over, and the battles we had survived were only the first act of a much larger, far more dangerous story. We settled into the shadows, alert, listening. Every sound, every movement could be the first sign of the next attack. And deep down, I knew he was right. The true test was still ahead, and it would demand everything we had, and more. Dawn crept over the canyon, brushing the jagged rocks with pale gold light. The river, once a mirror of moonlight, now reflected the first harsh streaks of the sun. We had barely slept, curled against the jagged stones, ears straining for any sound that might signal an attack. The man had insisted on keeping watch in shifts, and though exhaustion tugged at my eyelids, I couldn't stop thinking about the words he had whispered the night before. The real challenge will arrive. The shadow that follows every choice. I turned to see him standing, motionless, scanning the horizon with that same cold, calculating gaze. He didn't speak, but the weight of his presence was enough. Suddenly, the boy tugged at my sleeve. "Someone's coming," he whispered, barely audible. I squinted toward the canyon entrance, where the winding path met the cliff edge. Dust rose in the morning sun. Shapes moved through it, deliberate, disciplined. A small group, 5, maybe 6 figures, armed and armored in a way that suggested planning and experience. The man crouched beside us, rifle already raised. His expression was unreadable, but his fingers tightened around the stock, knuckles white. "They're scouts," he said softly. "Testing the waters. Seeing what they're up against. Let them get closer." We remained hidden behind the rocks, the boy trembling beside me. As the figures neared, I noticed something. Their armor wasn't standard issue. It had symbols, intricate designs that seemed familiar, though I couldn't place them. "They're not just any mercenaries," the man muttered under his breath. "These are hunters. Trained. Dangerous. And they've been tracking me for longer than either of you has been alive." The leader stepped forward, a tall figure with a scar running diagonally across his face. His eyes met the man's, and for a moment, a tense silence hung in the air. Then he spoke, voice smooth, cold, mocking. "You survived the canyon," he said. "Impressive. But survival isn't enough. Not for you. And certainly not for the children you've dragged into this." The man didn't flinch. "I don't drag anyone. They chose to follow, And now they'll have to survive with me. A smirk crossed the hunter's face. Survive? Let's see about that. He signaled his team, and immediately they fanned out, weapons raised, moving with calculated precision. The man's rifle cracked. One of the scouts dropped silently into the dust, and the others faltered for a split second. That was all the opening he needed. Move, he barked, and we sprinted along a narrow ledge that jutted from the canyon wall. Bullets kicked up dust around us, but the man's knowledge of the terrain turned every shadow, every jagged rock, into a defensive advantage. We rounded a corner, and I caught my breath, heart hammering. Who are they? I gasped. The man didn't answer immediately. His eyes followed the last retreating figures. They're called the Black Vipers, he said finally, voice low, deadly serious. A group of assassins and trackers bound by an oath to hunt me. And now, you. The boy whimpered, clutching my arm. Why you? Because I've crossed them before, the man replied grimly. I've taken what they wanted, destroyed what they sought, and refused what they demanded. They don't forgive. They don't forget. And they never stop. We reached a narrow cave, hidden behind a veil of hanging vines and rock. It smelled of damp stone and old smoke. The man ushered us inside, crouching low as the morning sun glinted off the metallic scales of distant armor. They'll regroup, he said, checking his rifle and pulling a small blade from his belt. And when they do, the next encounter won't be a test, it'll be a war. We'll need to anticipate every move, predict every trap, and act before they can strike. Understand? I nodded, though my hands trembled. The boy nodded too, though his fear was palpable. The man's gaze shifted toward us, piercing. This isn't a story about courage or luck anymore. This is about strategy, survival, and choices. Every decision from now on has consequences that echo far beyond this canyon. A low rumble shook the cave, distant, almost imperceptible. The man's eyes narrowed. They're coming. And when they arrive, there will be no mercy. The air thickened with tension. I felt it pressing in, a weight that made every breath a conscious effort. I understood, in that moment, that everything we had endured, the ambush, the narrow escapes, the nights of terror, had led to this confrontation. And the first major battle was only the beginning. The canyon was alive with shadows as the first echoes of footsteps reverberated through the narrow passageways. Dust clung to every surface, drifting in faint motes in the pale morning light, shimmering like fragile gold threads. The man had barricaded the entrance of the cave with jagged stones, improvising what could barely be called a defense. Still, the sound of approaching boots, measured, confident, predatory, sent a shiver down my spine. They know our position, he muttered, his voice barely audible over the soft wind. And they're not going to wait for us to run. We need to make the first move. The boy flinched at every noise, gripping my sleeve. His wide eyes were a mixture of terror and awe. I squeezed his shoulder, silently telling him to stay calm, though I felt little of it myself. The man's eyes scanned the canyon walls, memorizing the jagged outcroppings, the crags, and the narrow ledges. He seemed almost at home here, as though the entire landscape was a chessboard and he already knew the positions of every piece. From a distant ridge, a shadow detached itself from the rocky terrain. One by one, more figures emerged, their movements synchronized and deliberate. The Black Vipers. I could finally see the intricate symbols etched into their armor, curling like serpents in silver and black. Their leader, the man with the scar, walked at the forefront, exuding authority and menace. They're testing us, the man said. Seeing how far we'll go, what we'll risk. But this is just the beginning. The canyon will decide who survives. I swallowed hard as a volley of arrows whistled past, embedding themselves in the rock around us. The man dove behind a jagged boulder, motioning for us to follow. Stay low, he hissed. Use the terrain. Every shadow is an ally, every crack is a shield. We don't just fight them. We make them fight us. I crouched beside the boy, who trembled violently. He glanced up at me, eyes wide. Are we going to die? I wanted to lie. I wanted to tell him it would be okay, that we would survive, but the truth hung heavy between us like the dust. Not if we do exactly as he says, I murmured. He nodded, though the fear didn't leave his gaze. The first skirmish erupted with terrifying precision. The vipers fanned out, using the canyon's natural cover to approach from multiple angles. The man moved with lethal grace, rifle raised, striking with calculated efficiency. One by one, the vipers fell, each taken down before they could react. The metallic ring of their armor striking rock mixed with the low thud of bodies hitting dust. But for every one they lost, two more appeared. The vipers were relentless, disciplined, and well-trained. They had anticipated every trap, every diversion, except the man himself. His knowledge of the canyon gave us an edge, but even he could only hold them off for so long. From a higher ledge, the boy whispered, "There's more of them." I followed his gaze to see a second group descending the ridge, faster, angrier, armed with crossbows and short blades. They moved in perfect synchronization, covering each other's flanks, forcing the man into a defensive spiral. "We can't hold them forever," he said grimly, his jaw tight. "We have to split their attention. I'll draw them one way. You and the boy stay here, find the narrowest pass, and wait for my signal." "No," I said sharply. "We're not leaving you." His eyes softened for a brief moment, almost human, almost vulnerable. "Then we die together," he replied, though there was no fear in his tone. Only certainty. "Move now." We obeyed, retreating toward a narrow fissure that led deeper into the canyon. Bullets tore through the air behind us, kicking up rocks and dust. The man's figure was a blur of motion, disappearing and reappearing as he struck with surgical precision. Each encounter left him bloodied but unbowed. As we reached the fissure, he appeared beside us, dragging a fallen viper with him. "We can't keep doing this indefinitely," he said. His breath came in ragged gasps. "I have to reveal something. Something I've hidden because it was dangerous." "What is it?" the boy asked, voice trembling. The man's eyes darted toward the canyon entrance, then back at us. "I am not just a survivor. I am the last guardian of a weapon, a device they have been hunting for decades. It's hidden in this canyon. If they get to it, they won't just kill me. They'll destroy everything. Everything you know, everyone you love, everything in their path will burn." My stomach twisted. "A weapon? What kind of weapon?" "Power beyond comprehension," he said. "Not just bullets or bombs. Something that can end nations, shift balance, leave nothing but ruin. And the black vipers, they will stop at nothing to control it. That's why they hunt me. That's why they've killed countless innocents to track me down." The boy shivered. "And we're part of it." "Yes," he admitted. "You're here because they would have used you as leverage, used you as bait. I couldn't let that happen. Not to you." Our moment of explanation was cut short by a sudden explosion of rock above us. The vipers had found another way down, dropping silently from the upper cliffs. We scattered as rocks crashed, narrowly avoiding deadly impact. The boy screamed, but I pulled him into the shadows of the fissure. The man moved like a phantom, disarming one viper with a swift, silent strike, then turning his attention to another. "We're running out of time," he muttered. "They're closing the canyon, and once they do, escape will be impossible." I watched him, heart pounding, as he fought with ferocity and precision that defied exhaustion. Sweat and blood coated him, but his eyes never wavered, never faltered. He was more than a man now. He was a force of nature, a living weapon in human form. From the fissure, I noticed a narrow ledge above us, barely wide enough for a person to walk. "This way," I hissed to the boy. We scrambled upward, rocks shifting beneath our hands, dust blinding our eyes. Behind us, the man shouted, "Keep moving! Don't stop!" The vipers pursued relentlessly, their disciplined formations now chaotic but still dangerous. I could hear the metallic clink of armor and the unmistakable sound of blades scraping against stone. At last, we reached a high plateau, the canyon sprawling below us like a labyrinth of death. The man emerged beside us, surveying the battlefield. His expression was grim, exhausted, but there was a fire in his eyes, a determination that refused to be extinguished. "They think they can corner me," he said, voice low but fierce. "They don't know what it means to fight in the canyon. They don't know the secrets it holds. And they certainly don't know the choices I am willing to make to protect those who cannot protect themselves." The plateau offered no comfort, only exposure. But it was a vantage point, and the man's plan became clear. He would draw the vipers into the canyon's heart, into traps only he could navigate. "We're not done," he said. "Not by far. This is the turning point. Every step now is a choice, every action a gamble. And the next move will determine everything." The sun rose fully, illuminating the canyon in stark, unforgiving light. Shadows twisted and stretched across the rocks as the black vipers advanced, unaware of the trap awaiting them. And the man, bloodied, weary, but unbroken, prepared to unleash the full measure of his skill, cunning, and the hidden power that had been hunted for decades. This was not just a battle. It was a war, a test of strategy, courage, and survival. And the canyon itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the storm to break. The canyon seemed to shift as we moved, every rock, every shadow, every narrow ledge a potential threat. The man's strategy was both brilliant and terrifying. He was using the canyon itself as a weapon, a labyrinth of traps, pitfalls, and hidden dangers designed to corral the black vipers into areas where their numbers would count for nothing. But even as he orchestrated this deadly dance, the weight of exhaustion was visible in his movements. Every step carried the residue of countless battles, the toll of endless nights spent evading death. "Stay close," he whispered, pressing a hand against my shoulder as we advanced along a jagged ridge. "One misstep, and it's over. No canyon, no weapon, no escape." The boy's grip on my sleeve was iron-tight, his knuckles white. Are we going to be okay?" he asked, voice trembling. "We will," the man said without hesitation. His voice carried a firmness that belied the chaos surrounding us. "But you have to trust the canyon. Trust me. And trust yourselves." Below, the vipers were entering the trap zone. A seemingly ordinary stretch of canyon floor, a narrow passage flanked by jagged cliffs, was actually a deadly gauntlet. Rocks precariously balanced, nearly invisible tripwires, hidden pits. Every inch of this path had been designed to turn the attacker's confidence into carnage. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the man's plan. How did you even know about all of this?" He smirked faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "The canyon has been my teacher. I learned its secrets long before the vipers ever hunted me. Every rock, every crevice, they are allies if you know how to listen." The first wave of vipers entered the narrow pass. Almost immediately, chaos erupted. A rockslide triggered by a cleverly concealed lever sent dozens tumbling into a pit. The metallic clang of armor and the screams of the trapped echoed off the canyon walls, chilling in their intensity. But the vipers were relentless. Some leapt over the pit, some retreated, regrouped, and advanced again with cold precision. From our vantage point, the man directed the battle like a conductor of a symphony of destruction. Every shot he fired, every movement he made, was calculated, almost artistic in its precision. Yet there was an undercurrent of desperation. He knew the longer this battle dragged, the greater the risk, not just to us, but to the weapon he had sworn to protect. Suddenly, the ground beneath us shuddered. The boy froze, eyes wide with fear. "What was that?" "The canyon itself," the man said grimly. "Some traps are old. Traps I've set myself, long ago, anticipating enemies like this. We have to move." We scrambled along the ledge as boulders dislodged themselves behind us, crashing into the narrow corridor below and blocking potential pursuers. The vipers, now trapped in a shrinking gauntlet of death, began to panic, their disciplined formations breaking apart under the pressure of engineered chaos. But amid the chaos, one figure stood out, the scarred leader. Unlike the others, he did not falter. He moved with chilling intelligence, anticipating each trap, countering each obstacle with deadly efficiency. He was learning, adapting, becoming more dangerous with every passing second. The man's expression darkened. "He's not just a commander," he muttered. "He's something else. Be careful." As we descended further into the canyon, the traps became increasingly intricate. Hidden spikes, swinging logs, narrow ledges that could only support a single person. Every step was a gamble. The boy stumbled once, catching himself against the jagged rock. I grabbed him, whispering a promise to keep him safe, though the truth was uncertain. The man moved ahead, stopping at a narrow ledge overlooking a sheer drop. "This is it," he said. "The final zone. If we can draw them here, we can end this. But there's a risk." He explained the plan quickly. The Vipers would be forced to funnel into a single point, a precarious bridge spanning a chasm. The bridge itself was rigged to collapse, a mechanism only he could trigger. But the risk was immense. If even a fraction miscalculated, we could all fall. Below, the Vipers were closing in, their shouts echoing off the canyon walls. The scarred leader paused, scanning the canyon floor, his eyes locking onto ours for the first time. A silent recognition passed between the two men, a deadly personal understanding that words could not convey. "Are you ready?" the man asked. The boy nodded, fear and determination warring in his gaze. I squeezed his shoulder, feeling the cold weight of the decision we were about to make. "We have to be," I said. The first Vipers stepped onto the bridge. The man fired a shot, striking a critical point in the mechanism. The bridge shuddered violently, but held, for now. Panic erupted among the attackers, and the scarred leader's eyes narrowed. He leapt forward, narrowly avoiding the initial collapse, and we realized he was targeting the man personally. A brutal duel erupted on the bridge. The man and the scarred leader moved with uncanny speed, trading blows and gunfire, their movements almost a blur. The boy and I watched from the ledge, hearts hammering, helpless against the spectacle of lethal skill before us. Then, without warning, the mechanism fully triggered. The bridge collapsed with a deafening roar, sending Vipers tumbling into the abyss. Dust, debris, and screams filled the canyon, but the man and the scarred leader clung to the edges, locked in a deadly struggle. Bloodied, bruised, but unbroken, the man finally overpowered the scarred leader. With a final, decisive move, he sent him plummeting into the chasm, the echo of his fall fading into silence. For a moment, the canyon was still. Dust hung in the air, and the silence was almost unbearable. The boy let out a shaky breath, collapsing into my arms. "Is it over?" The man looked at us, his body trembling with exhaustion but his eyes alight with a fierce, unyielding fire. "Not yet," he said. "We survived the first wave. But the weapon, we must secure it before they send reinforcements. They will not stop hunting me. They will not stop until everything is in their control. And I will not let that happen, not while I still breathe." He led us deeper into the canyon, toward a hidden chamber carved into the rock. Within, the secrets of the weapon awaited, a device that could turn the tides of war, the fate of nations hanging in the balance. As we entered, I realized the canyon had revealed its ultimate secret. The man was not just a survivor, a warrior, or a guardian. He was a master of strategy, a keeper of forbidden knowledge, and the last line between the world we knew and unimaginable destruction. The boy clung to me, trembling. Will it keep us safe?" The man knelt, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "It will," he said. "But safety comes at a price. Courage, loyalty, and the willingness to make impossible choices. The battle is not over, but we have won a chance to survive, to protect, to fight another day. And we will use it." Above, the canyon walls seemed to exhale, releasing the tension of battle into the air. The path ahead remained perilous, the black Vipers still out there, but for the first time, there was hope, a fragile, dangerous hope, but hope nonetheless. The man turned to us, exhaustion and determination etched into his features. "Rest. Gather your strength. Tomorrow, we continue. And when the next wave comes, we will be ready." The chamber was vast, carved directly into the canyon walls, its interior illuminated by slivers of sunlight piercing through narrow crevices. Dust motes floated in the air, shimmering as if suspended in time. The weapon lay at the far end, partially covered with ancient cloth, its shape enigmatic, almost otherworldly. Its metallic surface reflected the dim light with a strange gleam, intricate engravings crawling along its length like living veins. The boy whispered, almost afraid to speak. What is it? The man knelt beside the device, tracing the engravings with a fingertip. It is older than any army, older than any law, he said, his voice low and reverent. This weapon is not meant to be wielded by the careless. Its power is immense, but it demands intelligence, discipline, and sacrifice. I stepped closer, trying to see what he saw. The engravings were unlike anything I had ever encountered. Symbols and patterns that seemed to shift as the light moved, almost alive in their complexity. Sacrifice? I asked, feeling a chill creep down my spine. The man didn't look up. Every great weapon demands a price. Every choice has a consequence. If we fail to understand it, it will destroy us. The boy shivered. Then, why do we have it? Why risk everything? He finally straightened, locking eyes with us both. Because if we do not protect it, others will take it, and the consequences will be far worse than death. Empires could fall, nations could burn, entire civilizations could be enslaved or annihilated. That is why we fight. That is why we survive. As he spoke, the ground outside the chamber trembled, a subtle, almost imperceptible warning. The vipers were regrouping, and they had discovered our position. The canyon, which had been our ally, was now a ticking trap for anyone who entered or exited carelessly. The man moved quickly, securing the weapon in a reinforced case built into the wall, hidden from view. We cannot remain here, he said. They will come. And when they do, we will need every advantage this canyon, and this weapon, can give us. Suddenly, a faint sound echoed through the chamber. Footsteps, steady, deliberate, approaching from the upper ledges. The scarred leader was not dead. Somehow, he had survived the fall. The man's eyes narrowed. He's alive, he said, almost in disbelief. And now, he knows where we are. Before we could react further, a stone wall to the side of the chamber shuddered violently. Dust and small rocks rained down, followed by a low, menacing growl. Shadows shifted along the walls, figures moving with calculated precision. The vipers had found a hidden path into the chamber. Prepare yourselves, the man shouted, drawing his weapon. His voice resonated through the stone, sharp and commanding. We hold them here. No one enters, no one leaves, until I say so. The boy clung to me, wide-eyed and trembling. Can we do it? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. We have to, I said, gripping his arm. There's no other choice. From the shadows, the first vipers emerged. Their eyes glinted with cold determination, their weapons ready, their movements coordinated and deadly. The scarred leader appeared last, stepping forward with a calculated calm that made my stomach twist. He raised a hand, signaling the attack with an almost ceremonial precision. The battle erupted. Rocks flew, weapons clashed, and shouts echoed off the canyon walls. The man moved like a phantom, precise and unrelenting, countering each attack with both skill and strategy. Yet even he could not fight every direction at once. The vipers pressed hard, using numbers and coordination to push us toward the chamber's center. We fought, we dodged, we countered, but it was clear, the battle was no longer about survival. It was about control of the weapon, control of the future itself. Whoever held it could tip the scales of the world. The boy stumbled, a viper lunging toward him with a raised blade. I reacted instinctively, throwing myself between them, feeling the sharp steel graze my arm. Pain flared, but there was no time to dwell. The man shouted, "Get to the weapon! Protect it at all costs!" As we scrambled toward the hidden case, I realized the truth. The canyon, the traps, the fight, they were all a test. A crucible designed not just to defend, but to reveal who was worthy of holding the weapon, who could survive its weight and the responsibility that came with it. The scarred leader lunged again, faster this time, his eyes burning with obsession. The man met him head-on, their struggle sending sparks flying as steel met steel. I could see every bead of sweat, every strained muscle, every calculated move. This was no longer just a battle. It was a confrontation between destiny and ambition, a clash that could determine the fate of all who depended on the weapon's survival. The clash between the man and the scarred leader reverberated through the canyon, a symphony of steel and grunts, echoing off the stone walls like thunder. Every strike, every dodge, seemed calculated, but the leader's obsession lent him a dangerous unpredictability. He was no longer just a man. He was a force of sheer will, fueled by greed and vengeance. The boy and I huddled near the weapon's hidden case, our hearts pounding. Dust filled the air, blurring our vision, but I could still see the intricate engravings glinting on the weapon, whispering promises of unimaginable power. It was tempting, almost hypnotic to reach out, but we knew better. Even a single wrong move could unleash devastation. "Stay behind me," I hissed at the boy. His wide eyes mirrored my own fear, yet also a fragile spark of resolve. He nodded, gripping a small dagger tightly, though it was clear it was more for courage than any practical use. The man parried another strike, his arms straining against the leader's ferocity. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," he shouted, each word a warning as much as a plea. "This weapon, it's not yours to command." The scarred leader laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Everything has a price," he spat. "I'm willing to pay it." His blade flashed, aiming not just to wound, but to dominate, to seize absolute control. In that moment, I realized something terrifying. The canyon itself seemed alive, reacting to the conflict. Rocks shifted, small tremors ran along the stone floor, and the air thickened with a tension that was almost tangible. It was as if the weapon, hidden but aware, was influencing the battlefield, amplifying danger with every heartbeat. A sudden movement from the boy caught my attention. He was staring at the engravings, muttering something under his breath, almost instinctively tracing the symbols with his fingers. To my shock, a faint glow began to emanate from the weapon, a soft, pulsating light that grew brighter with every second. The scarred leader noticed too. His eyes widened in a mixture of horror and fascination. What is he doing?" he growled. "It's awakening," the man said, his voice tense but edged with awe. "The weapon, it responds to intent, to purity of purpose. It will not obey the corrupt, only the worthy." I felt a surge of hope and fear, knowing that the boy, untested and unprepared, might be the key to controlling a power that could obliterate armies. And yet, even as the glow intensified, the battle raged around us. Every second counted, every choice carried immense weight, and the outcome hung by a thread thinner than the canyon's shadow. The night settled over the valley like a velvet cloak, dark and silent, yet buzzing with tension. I stood on the porch of the farm, the familiar scent of hay, leather, and autumn leaves filling the air. Orrin slept inside, unaware of the storm that was about to hit the small town he called home. Harlan had already gone into Garnet Ridge under the cover of darkness, his Colt strapped to his side, his figure a shadow against the moonlit horizon. Weeks of planning, whispers, and stolen glances had led us to this night. The shipment that had once set the town against me, the gold, the lies, the planted evidence, would finally be exposed. But I knew the danger was real. Durgan and Voss weren't men to surrender lightly, and Felix Crow's unpredictable teeth and claws had taught me caution. Every shadow might hide betrayal. Every step might trigger disaster. I tightened my shawl around my shoulders, the wool coarse but comforting. The notebook with my shorthand sat tucked safely under my arm, its pages a map of greed and corruption. Every conversation, every whisper, every move recorded here could prove the difference between life and death, truth and slander. I could feel the weight of the pages, the gravity of what I had uncovered. From the barn, the faint clink of iron made me turn. Josiah Bell had arrived, silent as the wind, rope coiled over his shoulder, eyes sharp as the edge of a knife. Li Wei, the Chinese track worker, crouched near the rails, a bundle of lanterns beside him, ready to signal the marshal. And in the distance, hidden in the shadows, Harlan's silhouette was still and patient, his hand resting on his rifle, unwavering. I led Orrin to the wagon for his own safety. "Stay here," I whispered. He nodded, gripping my hand, and for a moment I could feel the warmth of his trust, a fragile, precious thing that had grown over weeks of teaching him letters and numbers, of sharing laughter and quiet moments. "I'll be back before dawn," I promised, though the lie and the truth were indistinguishable in the thick night air. We approached the sidetrack where the boxcar would arrive. Moonlight glinted off the rails, turning them into twin rivers of silver leading into darkness. My heart pounded like the rhythm of a drum, every beat echoing the stakes of the night. The plan was simple in theory. The marshal would catch them red-handed with a shipment, the evidence I had gathered would corroborate every accusation, and the town would finally see the truth. But simple was a word for people with less to lose. The headlight of the approaching train pierced the darkness, a knife slicing through shadow. The wheels screeched, gravel spraying like sparks, and the boxcar halted exactly where Josiah's lantern signaled. Durgin and Voss emerged first, confident, arrogant, and blind to the traps set around them. Felix Crow lingered behind, a sinister grin lighting his face under the brim of his hat. I held my breath, stepping closer to the edge of the shadows, notebook ready. Every word, every movement, every intent of those men would soon be frozen in time, captured not by luck but by planning, courage, and unwavering purpose. Durgin reached for a crate. "Make it quick," he snarled. "The marshal won't." But the sound of boots and the sharp crack of a rifle halted him mid-sentence. Harlan's Colt barked like thunder, the bullet kicking up dust at Felix Crow's boots. The two men froze, eyes wide, hands raised, as the other hidden deputies stepped from the shadows. "By federal authority, you are under arrest," the marshal's voice cut through the night. Durgin's jaw worked, then he froze, the gravity of the moment settling on him like a leaden weight. Voss paled, the swagger drained from him instantly. Crow tried to move, but a deputy's hand grabbed his shoulder, and for the first time, he looked genuinely afraid. I stepped forward, holding the notebook high. "This is the record," I said, my voice strong, unwavering. "Everything you've done, every plan, every lie. It's all here." The loops and curls of shorthand gleamed in the lantern light, a testament to weeks of quiet observation, risk, and resilience. The marshal leaned over, scanning the pages, his eyes widening in recognition. "It's all here," he said flatly. "Matches the shipment, matches the scene, matches the gold we now see in front of us. And the plot to silence this witness," his gaze met mine, "is over." Relief washed over me, but there was no time for celebration. Durgin, Voss, and Crow were taken into custody, their arrogance replaced by the cold reality of chains and handcuffs. The deputies worked efficiently, securing the gold, checking manifests, and ensuring no one could tamper with the evidence. The night was no longer silent, it was alive with the hum of justice, the clatter of authority restoring order. I sank to my knees beside Orrin when we returned, relief and exhaustion mingling in a tidal wave of emotion. He hugged me tightly, the warmth of his small arms anchoring me to the reality of safety, of home. Harlan came up behind us, his hand resting on my shoulder, grounding me in the tangible comfort of trust, loyalty, and enduring courage. The first rays of dawn painted the valley gold. Cottonwoods shimmered, the creek ran clear, and for the first time in weeks, the air seemed light, free of the heavy tension that had clung to it like a second skin. The school bell rang, its tone bright and crisp, carrying the promise of new beginnings, of lessons to be taught, of life rebuilt on honesty and care. I watched the children arrive, laughing and chattering, their eyes wide with wonder and trust. Orrin's laughter spilled out across the barnyard, and Harlan's proud smile met mine across the morning light. Freedom was no longer a fragile concept or a distant hope. It was tangible, rooted in the earth beneath our feet, in the warmth of family, and the trust of a community that had once been fractured but now found its balance. I finally understood. Freedom was never about fleeing or surviving. It was about belonging, about choosing a life that mattered, about standing tall after the storms of lies and betrayal. And for the first time, I could breathe deeply, knowing I had carved a place for myself here, among the cottonwoods and the open sky, where the days built on one another and hope was no longer fragile. It was real. As the sun rose fully over Cinder Creek, spilling light across the valley, I smiled. The past was a shadow behind me. The future stretched forward, endless and golden, and for the first time, I was truly free. As he held them close, the years of fear and longing melted away. The truth had finally returned to him, but the journey had left scars deeper than he could have imagined. 3 years lost, 3 years of wandering, and yet here they were, alive, singing, and whole. If you were in his place, would you have fought the same fight? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video, and explore the other stories waiting for you on the screen. Every story is a new journey. Dive in and see where it leads.